Donald Trump is a living embodiment of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This thing where your ignorance in an area makes you ignorant of the things that you're ignorant about. And when you combine that with confidence, it can lead to not just ignorance, but also a resistance to actually learning. And we've got the ultimate example of that for you now. Donald Trump had a meeting with some Chinese trade officials and his own trade official who tried as hard as he possibly could to get Donald Trump to understand a very simple concept, and Donald Trump in real time proved his unwillingness to do so.
Will the MOUs be a long-term deal? How long would your MOUs stay?
I think the MOU is going to be very short-term. No, we expect to go into, I don't like MOUs because they don't mean anything. To me, they don't mean anything. I think you're better off just going into a document.
An MOU is a contract. It's the way trade agreements are generally used. People refer to it like it's a term sheet. It's not a term sheet. It's an actual contract between the two parties. Yes. A memorandum of understanding is a binding agreement between two people.
By the way, I disagree. I think that a memorandum of understanding is not a contract to the extent that we want. We're doing a memorandum of understanding that will be put into a final contract, I assume. But to me, the final contract is really the thing, Bob, and I think you mean that too, is really the thing that means something. A memorandum of understanding is exactly that. It's a memorandum of what our understanding is. But to me, the contract is, the real question is, Bob, so we do a memorandum of understanding, which frankly, you could do or not do. I don't care if you do it or not. To me, it doesn't mean very much. But if you do a memorandum, how long will it take to put that into a final binding contract?
What? From now on, we're not using the word memorandum of understanding anymore. We're going to use the term trade agreement, all right?
Okay. Right.
No more. We'll never use the term agreement. We'll have the same document. It's going to be called a trade agreement. We're never going to use MOU again.
Are they going to put that into another agreement?
What we'll have will be a trade agreement that if we cross, we have major hurdles. I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. Assuming you decide on an agreement, it'll be signed by the two people. It'll be a trade agreement between the United States and China. We're not going to use it.
I like that much better. I like that term much better.
Do you agree with that?
That was an epic effort by Robert Lighthizer, US Trade Representative. But dude, if you want to get Trump to understand what you mean, you have to go over and you have to twist his ear and say, "Shut up, little boy, and let the adults speak." So that was insane. I mean, maybe this is kind of an aside, but I feel like if you've never really understood what mansplaining was like, that I think is what it's like to hear someone who knows nothing about this thing talking to a person whose life it is and telling them, no, I think what you really mean is this. And so Trump-splaining is very much a thing. Also, hashtag Dunning-Kruger. Go watch the video that we did last week on the Dunning-Kruger effect, because that was the greatest demonstration of it that I've seen in my life. So much so that, take a look what happened. So this is about Chinese trade with China. And so when he said, "I disagree," so he goes off on what a memorandum of understanding isn't, because he neither understands it nor memorandums it. Then there's a big explanation of what it actually is, and he responds with, "I disagree," said a scowling Trump, causing the top Chinese negotiator to laugh. To laugh at him because he doesn't know what he's talking about and he just had it explained to him. So this is an issue that supposedly, as president, Donald Trump cares a lot about and knows a lot about. In the campaign, he was saying, he talked constantly about trade and how much he knows about it. But he apparently knows less now than he did then, if he knew anything at all at that point. So look, I will attempt to be, and I understand this is breaking my promise because I promised never to be fair to Trump. I will try to be a little bit fair. There are contexts outside of world trade where a memorandum of understanding does mean something less than a binding contract, hypothetically, in some areas. And it's possible that in his life as a private citizen who has been sued many times, he has had to come across these sorts of things. But he's been president for literally years now at this point. He's talking to his chosen trade representative who understands this legal process better than he does, better than I do, better than any of us does. So defer to the person with the knowledge on very specific things like this. But he can't do that. He thinks that he knows better than all of those people, whether the topic is trade with China or ballistic missile technology or whatever. He is always so sure of himself and his brain is so packed full of self-assurance that there's no room for either knowledge or the curiosity necessary to generate new knowledge. So there's that. On a very specific issue, the Memorandum of Understanding, They literally have to back off of a term in the White House from now on because he has proven that he will never understand what it means. But it goes deeper than that. It goes more fundamental than that. And so now I turn to Janet Yellen, so former chair of the Fed, former official under Donald Trump, asked on Marketplace, the BBC's US radio partner, if she thought the president had a grasp of macroeconomic policy. Janet Yellen replied, "No, I do not." Now let's be very specific about what she was asked. Not could he teach a master's course on macroeconomics, not does he rise to the level of some of the great economic minds of our time. It's does he have a grasp at all about the fundamentals of macroeconomics, and she says, no, I do not. And she says specifically in terms of his relationship with the Fed, I doubt that he would even be able to say that the Fed's goals are maximum employment and price stability, which is the goals that Congress have assigned to the Fed. And she goes into a detail about why she believes he fundamentally misunderstands what the point of the Federal Reserve is, saying, when I continually hear focus by the president and some of his advisors on remedying bilateral trade deficits with other trade partners, I think almost any economist would tell you that there's no real meaning to bilateral trade deficits and it's not an appropriate objective of policy. Now look, there's a lot that I would disagree with Janet Yellen on, but on this fundamental truth, not only do I agree, I have been making this exact point for like 3.5 years now. When he talks about the trade deficit specifically with China, he is not talking as a person with sort of a different perspective on economics. Like I come at it from a progressive point of view, he comes at it from a conservative point of view. There are people where we would have that disagreement, but that is not the disagreement between myself and Donald Trump. He comes at it from the point of view of a poorly socialized 4-year-old. He doesn't know what it means. He just thinks that if the deficit is in their favor, they're winning. Not in some specific macroeconomic context, but just in the sense of, I don't want to be beat. I don't want the US to lose to them. And I refuse to go even 1 inch further than that and try to understand why there is the trade deficit that there is. And that it is not some sort of thing where there was 2 negotiators, an American and a Chinese negotiator, and the Chinese negotiator just beat us. It's reflective of consumer habits on the American side and the Chinese side. These are large-scale things that are gradually shifting over the course of decades. They're the collective decisions of tens or hundreds of millions of people that are determining this bilateral trade deficit. It's not a thing where he can just butt his head against them and get his way. And when you have someone who approaches some of the most important trade issues of the day from the perspective of someone who has literally never heard about it, never learned about it, never thought about it, then God only knows what he'll end up doing. And we've already seen the fallout from some of the tariffs that he's put up. He doesn't understand what effect they would have on the industries that he purports to want to defend. When we generate more money by the tariffs, he doesn't even understand who's paying that. He doesn't get fundamentally years into his first term that we're the ones that pay for that. China doesn't do it. I do, you do, the people purchasing the products do. And he really seems to think that he can dramatically shift our buying habits in the course of just a year or two. Maybe long term, something like that might happen. But for now, we are paying to the tunes of literally billions of dollars every year because of his misunderstanding of these fundamental economic truths. Now, the reason that I point out these 2 cases with Robert Lighthizer on the one hand and Janet Yellen on the other is not just to laugh at the president. That's one reason and it's fun, but that's not the only reason. It's because these are incredibly consequential misunderstandings where his stupidity and his ignorance now affects not just his life, not just whether Trump vodka or Trump steaks goes under, but whether we go under, whether our country goes under. How will our economy do? To the extent that any president can determine that, he is doing it. And it is in almost universally negative fashion when it comes to world trade. There are experts who get things wrong. Brett and I are actually, we're in the initial stages of a possible book about the history of humans getting the most important things wrong in different fields. So you don't need to defer on experts on everything. And people have agendas. But on basic truths like what a memorandum of understanding actually is, what the point of the Federal Reserve actually is, Donald Trump, I beg of you, before you destroy us all, listen just a little bit to the people who have spent their lives learning about this stuff. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.